He said I'd be back mowing lawns by summer, that no computer would ever feed me. And when I drove into the family barbecue in a red Ferrari, my dad still didn't believe it was mine. What does it take to be seen? Not by the world, but by the people who've already decided who you are. This is the story of a young man who built a financial empire out of late nights and rejection letters, and the father who measured success in calloused hands and sunburned necks. It's not a tale about revenge. It's about recognition. And what happens when two generations learn to respect each other without ever saying the words? You're about to hear a story that might feel personal, because maybe in some way it already is. My name is Joshua Langford. I'm 23 years old, and I built a financial technology startup from a tiny apartment in Charleston, South Carolina. But that's not where this story begins. It begins in my father's backyard. Well, actually, his business, Langford Landscaping. He started it with one truck, one mower, and a whole lot of sweat. And for as long as I can remember, he believed success had to hurt to be real. You had to feel it in your bones. You had to come home dirty. So when I chose finance over following him into the family business, he didn't say much. He just shook his head and muttered something like, "Boys who play with computers don't last long in the real world." I wish I could say I proved him wrong overnight. But truth is, it took years. Years of rejection, of ramen dinners, of watching my friends live normal lives while I coded in the dark, chasing a dream no one believed in, not even my own family, except maybe my mom. She never said it out loud, but she believed in a quiet way. She believed the way mothers do, with folded bills slipped into your coat pocket and late-night prayers when she thought I was asleep. And as for my dad, well, let's just say this story doesn't end the way either of us expected. Where I grew up, success didn't come dressed in a suit. It wore work boots, carried a lunchbox, and came home with aching hands and dirt under the fingernails. That's the world my father knew, and the one he expected me to follow. Nathan Langford, my dad, started Langford Landscaping with nothing but a second-hand truck, a mower, and more grit than most men I've ever met. He built his company, and his identity one blade of grass at a time. And from the moment I could push a wheelbarrow, I was part of it. Every summer from the age of 12, I worked for him. We'd start before the sun came up. Me in a too-big cap and borrowed gloves, him shouting instructions over the roar of machinery. We planted trees, hauled mulch, laid sod in 100-degree heat. It was hard, honest, real, and I respected him deeply for it. But I wasn't like him. I loved numbers, patterns, and systems that lived in screens rather than soil. While he found purpose in shaping the land, I found it in writing code, tinkering with market simulations, and obsessing over algorithms. I was the boy who brought a laptop to the job site and got teased for it. One day, when I was about 16, I stayed up all night building a simple investment prediction tool. I showed it to him the next morning over breakfast. Excited, he looked at the screen for 3 seconds and said, "You can't plant a tree with that, son." That was the moment it clicked. He didn't just misunderstand my passion. He dismissed it, not out of cruelty, but because in his world, anything you couldn't touch, carry, or build with your bare hands didn't count as real work. This generational gap isn't unique to us. It's a story playing out in households all over the country, between factory workers and their tech-savvy kids, between shop owners and their entrepreneurial daughters building businesses from their bedrooms. See, when two definitions of success collide, it's not just about pride. It's about fear. Fear that if the new way is right, then maybe the old way was wrong all along. But here's the truth. One way doesn't cancel out the other. They just build in different directions. And for me, the tension wasn't in choosing between them. It was in trying to honor one while following the other. Coming up next, I'll take you inside the long, quiet years where I worked in the shadows, coding, pitching, failing, and try to prove that maybe, just maybe, a boy who played with computers could still build something real. There's something that happens when people think they already know who you are. They stop asking questions. And worse, they stop listening. After I chose business school over landscaping, I could feel the disappointment trailing me like a shadow. My dad didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just said, well, college boys think they know everything until they meet the real world. And then he handed me a $20 bill like I was heading off to summer camp. He didn't ask what I wanted to study. He didn't ask why. The truth is, I didn't want to just make money. I wanted to solve something. To figure out how ordinary people could invest smarter, safer, how technology could level the playing field against massive firms. It started with a spreadsheet, then some formulas, then late nights coding in the library until security kicked me out. Sophomore year, I showed a prototype of my algorithm to one of my professors. He blinked, leaned back, and said, "This could change everything." I dropped out the next semester. I didn't have a plan, just a cheap laptop, 2 roommates, and a dream I wasn't sure how to explain to anyone back home, especially not to a man who once told me a good day's work ends with sore arms and dirty boots. I was building models, market trend simulations, backtesting data across a decade. Meanwhile, my father was telling family friends that I was figuring things out with that smile people wear when they mean the opposite. Every Thanksgiving, I sat at the kids' table, not because of my age, but because nobody quite knew what to do with a kid who'd left real work behind. And yet, I kept going, not out of arrogance, but because deep down, I believed in what I was building, even when nobody else did. And I wasn't completely alone. There was Thomas, my college roommate, who brought me food when I forgot to eat, proofread every investor pitch, and never once made me feel small. He once said, "You're the smartest person I know. Just don't forget us little people when you're rich." And I didn't. Here's what I learned in those years. When you're underestimated, it hurts, but it also gives you space to grow quietly, to build without noise. And when the world finally turns to look, you're not just ready, you're already rising. In the next chapter, I'll take you to the morning I opened that email, the one that turned ramen into room service and silence into applause. But trust me, even then, I wasn't sure how to feel. People love to talk about success, the headlines, the big deals, the moments that sparkle, but they rarely talk about what it costs to get there. And I'm not just talking about money. After I dropped out, I moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment with 2 friends from college. We split the rent 3 ways, cooked ramen in bulk, and shared one decent Wi-Fi connection. My workspace was a folding table wedged between the kitchen and the water heater. It smelled like damp concrete and old coffee filters. For 2 years, that folding table was my universe. Code, pitch decks, phone calls, investor meetings. Most of them went nowhere. I still remember my first rejection email. The subject line read, "Interesting idea, not the right time." It stung. So I printed it out, taped it on the wall. Then came another and another until the wall looked like a collage of no thank yous. People said I was too young, too inexperienced, not realistic. One investor even told me, "It's cute that you're trying." I laughed on the outside. On the inside, I broke a little. I skipped weddings, missed birthdays. There was a Christmas where I didn't have enough gas to drive home, so I just stayed in and watched the snow fall through a drafty window. There were nights I stared at my code and wondered if it was all just a fantasy, if maybe my dad had been right after all. But every time I felt that weight pulling me back, something small kept me going. Sometimes it was a message from Thomas, "Hey, proud of you." Other times, it was remembering my mom's quiet faith, or just the thought that if I gave up now, all that struggle would have meant nothing. You see, the hidden cost of building something new is loneliness, doubt, and silence. But here's what they don't teach you in business school. Sometimes silence is where the real work happens. Because while no one's cheering, you're sharpening your voice. While no one's watching, you're building something they can't yet see. And when the time does come, you won't be lucky, you'll be ready. Next, I'll tell you about that morning. The one where I opened my laptop, groggy, holding a cold cup of coffee, and read the subject line that would change my life forever. It was just another morning. No fireworks, no music, no sign from the sky. Just me, in a hoodie 3 days past laundry, standing barefoot in a kitchen that smelled like stale noodles and ambition. I remember holding my mug, cold coffee as usual, and opening my laptop like I had 100 times before. Most days it was rejection, silence, spam. But that day, there it was. Subject line, exclusive licensing inquiry, Blackwater Capital. I blinked. Once, twice, opened it, read it again. $14 million. For exclusive rights to my algorithm. 14 million. I read that email 17 times standing right there in the kitchen, frozen like if I moved, the words might disappear. I didn't scream. I didn't dance. I called Thomas. He screamed loud enough to rattle the windows. Then I called my mom. She cried again, but this time it wasn't worry. It was wonder. I didn't call my dad, not out of spite, but because I didn't know what I'd say or what he'd say back. That week, I flew to New York for the first time in my life. Signed a deal in a glass-walled office where even the air felt expensive. The CEO, a woman named Patricia Donovan, raised a glass and said, "To the future of finance." I smiled and nodded politely. But inside, I was still just that kid who once got laughed at for playing with computers. Here's what I learned that day. Real power doesn't always show up in noise. It builds quietly, line by line, rejection by rejection, night after night, until one day it speaks for itself. And when it does, you don't need to shout. You just show up. And that's exactly what I plan to do. Not with press releases or big interviews. Not with billboards or flexing online. I had something else in mind. Something simple. Something that would say everything without me saying a word. Next up, I'll take you to the moment I drove home and parked a red Ferrari next to my father's truck. Let's talk about what happens when success knocks at the family barbecue. It was Memorial Day weekend. The grill was going. Kids were running around with popsicles, and the adults gathered in little circles. Cold drinks in hand, light laughter in the air. I hadn't seen most of these people in years. Some were family. Some were family by obligation. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I didn't want to. For years, I had been the one they smiled at with thin kindness. Still trying that startup thing. You know, it's okay to get a real job. Maybe something stable like teaching. They weren't cruel, just dismissive. Like I was a nice idea that didn't quite grow up. That morning, I picked up the car. Ferrari, red, gleaming like a fire you couldn't ignore. Not because I needed it, but because I was tired of explaining. When I pulled up to the curb, the music didn't stop, but the conversation did. They stared, silent, a few forced smiles. Then came the comment I had somehow known would arrive. "You rented that, right?" It was my father. I didn't argue. I didn't say, "Dad, I've been working 14-hour days for the last 6 years." I didn't say, "I skipped vacations, lived off ramen, lost friends, lost sleep, but I built something that finally worked." I just smiled, handed him the keys, and walked past him into the backyard. There's a moment in every underdog story where explaining becomes exhausting, where words just don't work anymore. And here's the truth. When people can't imagine your growth, they'll rewrite your success into something they can understand. A lucky break, a gimmick, a rental. But you don't owe them clarity. You only owe yourself peace. Success doesn't need to be shouted. Sometimes it just pulls up to the driveway, parks, and lets the engine purr. And in that silence, the years of doubt, judgment, and second-guessing dissolve like morning fog. Before we move on, I want to pause here for just a second, because this part of the story hits something deeper, doesn't it? Have you ever had a moment where you wish someone, maybe a parent, a sibling, a teacher, could just see you for who you really are now? That moment when you walked into a room, hoping they'd notice, but all you got was silence or worse, dismissal? If this reminds you of something in your life, I'd love to hear it. Drop a comment below. Share your story, your turning point, or just how this made you feel. You never know who else might need to read your words today. All right, let's keep going. The Ferrari moment didn't end the noise. It just changed its tone. At first, The silence of the Memorial Day party had felt like closure. But a few days later, I started hearing things. From cousins, old neighbors, even a message from my high school math teacher. Apparently, my dad had been talking. He told people I was probably running a scam, that the company was just a shiny shell with nothing real inside. It's all talk, he said. Smoke and mirrors. I wish I could say I was surprised, but I wasn't. See, when someone succeeds a way that challenges another person's idea of what success should look like, it doesn't always inspire. Sometimes it threatens. My dad believed in hard, visible work that made your hands calloused, your shirt soaked with sweat. He came from a world of pickup trucks, tool belts, and cutting grass until sunset. What I was doing: code, algorithms, back-end systems, cloud infrastructure. He couldn't see it. So to him, it wasn't real. And that disconnect between what he knew and what I was building became a gap too wide for him to cross. When people don't understand something, they often treat it as worthless. We confuse "I don't get it" with "it doesn't matter," but they're not the same. And the danger is, when we don't understand, we resist. We label, we doubt, we whisper. Think about how older generations struggled to understand cryptocurrency, or online influencers, or even remote work. For many, if it didn't involve a physical product or a 9-to-5 office, it felt like fiction. But that fiction created billion-dollar realities. If someone you love is growing in a direction you don't recognize, resist the urge to criticize. Ask instead. Get curious. Because silence hurts, but being misjudged by your own family, that stays longer. I didn't fight my dad's rumors. I just kept building. Because I learned that explaining yourself to those unwilling to listen is a silent tax you don't owe anyone. It was a Tuesday afternoon, one of those oddly quiet ones, where even the wind feels cautious. I had stopped by my parents' house unannounced, not for any dramatic reason, just to drop off a book I thought my dad might like. But something felt off. The lawn was overgrown, the lights dim. The usual hum of the television was missing. I found my father sitting at the kitchen table, not with his usual coffee, but with a pile of papers spread out like fallen dominoes. He didn't hear me at first, and when he did, he didn't greet me with his usual firm nod. Instead, he looked up slowly and said, "I tried to fix it, Josh." That was the moment everything shifted. I had spent so long resenting him. His dismissiveness, his harsh words, the rumors he spread. But right there in that kitchen, I saw none of that. I saw an aging man, tired, embarrassed, quietly unraveling. His business, the one he had spent 3 decades building, was falling apart. He had mortgaged the house, taken out loans, used every last drop of credit to try and save something that was slipping anyway. And he didn't tell anyone, not out of pride, but because he didn't know how to say, "I'm failing." So many from his generation equate struggle with shame. Admitting you're overwhelmed? That's weakness. Needing help? That's failure. But it's not really, because strength isn't about always winning. Sometimes it's about finally whispering, "I need help." That day, I didn't offer advice. I didn't scold or say, "You should have told me sooner." I just sat beside him and said, "We'll figure it out together." Because despite everything, the judgment, the distance, the silence, he was still my father. And maybe, for the first time, he was just a man in need of grace. Even the strongest people you know may be holding together something that's quietly breaking. And sometimes, the most powerful act of love is just being there when they finally let go. It started with a late-night walk through the warehouse behind my dad's office. Dust clung to old machines. The crew's jackets still hung on hooks by the door. There was something sacred about the place, something that didn't show up on a spreadsheet. It wasn't just a business. It was memory, legacy, family. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Langford landscaping disappear. Not like this. But I also knew I couldn't save it by writing a personal check. My dad would never accept that. His pride wouldn't allow it. To him, charity was pity. And pity was worse than failure. So I chose a different route. Through Greenscape, We proposed a quiet acquisition, a merger that, on paper, looked like just another business deal. But we built it with care. Every employee would stay. No layoffs. No sudden changes. The name Langford Landscaping would continue, just power by Greenscape. And my father, he'd still be there. Title intact. Leadership respected. Voice heard. It wasn't a rescue. It was a partnership. One that didn't erase what he built, but gave it new ground to stand on. So many mergers in today's world are cold, stripped down, just numbers, charts, and cost efficiency. But real progress, the kind that lasts, it doesn't bulldoze history. It builds on it. My father's company had heart, community, generations of trust. What we brought in wasn't disruption. It was support, code and soil, data and diesel. A handshake from the past meeting a system update from the future. When innovation lifts tradition instead of replacing it, we don't lose our roots, we strengthen them. And though my father never said it outright, the day he introduced me to the crew as the guy who saved our ship, I saw it in his eyes. Not just relief, but respect. The launch of Horizon Analytics was meant to be a milestone in my professional life. The press was there. Investors, partners, my team, all dressed in polished shoes and quiet anticipation. The banners were sleek. The demo was flawless. The energy electric. But there was one thing that didn't appear in any brochure or slide deck. My father, standing near the edge of the stage. Not as a guest, but as a newly appointed executive. That morning, we had finalized the announcement. Greenscape, his company, was now a strategic partner in Horizon Analytics. And more than that, he would take on a new role, Director of Traditional Operations. It wasn't just a title, it was a statement. When I stepped up to the podium, the words came slower than usual. This wasn't just another business pitch. It was personal. I looked out at the crowd, then back at my father, and said, "Today isn't about replacing what came before with something shinier. It's about recognizing the strength that got us here and weaving it into what's next. We're not starting over. We're building together." For the first time in a long time, he didn't look away. He didn't apologize for the years of tension, or for the doubt, or the distance. But he didn't have to. He was here. Redemption doesn't always look like a teary embrace or a grand speech. Sometimes it's a silent nod from across the room. A father showing up in a space his son built, not to take credit, but to take part. We often think healing requires words, long conversations, carefully chosen phrases. But sometimes what we really crave is an apology. It's acknowledgement, a presence that says, "I see you now." You don't always get the apology you hoped for, but if someone is willing to grow with you, walk beside you without ego or resistance, that can mean more than any "I'm sorry" ever could. As the event wrapped up, a reporter asked if this move was about reconciliation. I smiled and said, "No, it's about inclusion." Because this story was never about winning. It was about not leaving anyone behind. It had been 6 months since the Horizon launch. Life didn't look louder. It looked lighter. Mom had finally retired after decades of teaching. No more lesson plans, no more early alarms. She sent us photos from Spain, from a vineyard in Tuscany, even from a pottery class in Santorini. For the first time in her life, she wasn't worrying about everyone else. She was simply living. Dad, on the other hand, hadn't slowed down, he just shifted. Every week, I'd see him in the Horizon conference room with a group of local business owners, auto shop mechanics, landscaping crews, bakery owners. Sitting in a circle, notebooks open, scribbling down every word he said. He wasn't lecturing. He was sharing. And they listened, not because of the title on his name tag, but because he'd lived what they were living. He showed them how to manage cash flow, how to negotiate vendor contracts, how to take pride in small steps. No slideshows, just stories, patience, and coffee. One Thursday morning, I arrived at the office in my old sedan. Nothing flashy, just familiar. And as I pulled into my spot, I noticed Dad's new truck parked beside me. Clean, strong, practical. No longer a symbol of resistance, but belonging. For the first time, our vehicles didn't feel like two different generations trying to prove themselves. They felt like markers of two lives, finally aligned. Inside Horizon headquarters, there's a sign above the lobby desk. Simple, understated, and easy to miss. Remember whose shoulders you stand on. Not a motto, a truth. Because while innovation built the future, it was love, sweat, and belief that gave it a place to stand. Winning doesn't always mean getting ahead. Sometimes it means turning around, reaching back, and bringing the people you once resented into the world you were once trying to prove. Not because they apologized, but because they matter. And when you build something big enough for others to belong, especially those who didn't believe in you at first, that's the kind of success that outlives you. It ends with a mother finding joy in distant sunsets, a father helping strangers build their dreams, a son who no longer needed a Ferrari to feel seen, and a company rooted in both old wisdom and new ideas. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of this story. If there's one thing we can take away from Joshua's journey, it's this. Sometimes, proving someone wrong isn't about winning. It's about building something so real, so meaningful, that it speaks for itself. Success isn't just about the numbers or the headlines. It's about creating space for both the past and the future, for hard-earned wisdom and new ideas to stand side by side. I'd love to know, what did this story make you feel? Did it remind you of someone in your life? Or maybe of a time when you had to fight to be seen? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your words truly matter here. And if this story touched you in some way, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We got so many more real, heartfelt stories coming your way. Until next time, take care, and remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is quietly keep going